Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. This is Comprehensivist Wednesdays that we do in collaboration with the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. Today, we are going to be looking at one of Buckminster Fuller's greatest idea, that of universe. Now, do not think about this using the concept of universe you have, because it's a radically different concept of his. So the word is the same, the references are quite different. So please take your time to understand it. The format, Maritza is going to talk about this based on her trying to study the entire universe in a week. And then we are going to open it up for comments. I would like to start with people who are familiar with the idea. And again, keep focused on Buckminster Fuller's concept of universe, because that's the topic today. All right. So with that, over to you, Maritza.
Okay, so I feel the need to again give you the disclaimer. I am novice in this concept. I did take and I pulled down every section where universe was described in detail in Buckminster Fuller's Synergetics 1 and 2. And I've been working on studying that, but I would sedentary count. I need many, many more months. So you get my rudimentary thoughts. So first, I'm going to start with there's the overview really quick. So Buckminster Fuller has like his definition of universe is very long. We were just looking at it. It's like a page and a half of the definition. It's very good. So I'm attempting to synopsize it here, and bear with me. I'm a little nervous because I would like to do it justice. But I'm pulling out the most important, the tendril to me. His concept of universe, he believes that universe is a highly organized and interconnected system that operates according to specific geometric and mathematical principles. He believed that these principles could be used to understand and optimize the functioning of the universe. And he believed that the universe was constantly evolving and adapting. So the biggest thing to me of this concept is the idea of universe is that we are all connected. All of our actions have far-reaching consequences. And so then he goes on and he shows how this is not just an opinion. He shows you how things in nature act and react. And he's showing you these things already exist. So he takes his definition and he walks you through all of these very specific things that already exist so that he can get you to the idea of the interconnectivity of universe. And he describes humans as being a part within the universe. He says universe is the aggregate of all humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated non-simultaneous and only partially overlapping experiences. And what that means is, again, we're not. So if universe is, the big aggregate, we're a subset. And there's things overlapping, but it's not all happening at the same exact time. It's happening kind of with some type of overlapping tendency. He does. So once he tells us that very big mouthful, he explains that aggregate means some totally, but non-unitarily conceptual as of any one moment. He defines consciousness as an awareness of others. He defines apprehension as information furnished by those wave frequencies tunable with man's limited sensorial spectrum. And he defines communicated as informing self or others. He defines non-simultaneous as not occurring at the same time. So I love that he gives us the definitions, because now we go back to the statement. Universe is the aggregate of all humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated non-simultaneous and only partially overlapping experiences. And because we got a chance to hear how he defines each of those big words, it sounds a little less like words that are unintelligible to us, at least from my perspective. Now, there are a few things that, like, throughout all, it's like about 40 pages of stuff, but there's a couple things that he says that I think are impactful overall. So he tells us, because we start with the whole universe, we have left out nothing. And to me, that's a major key element of looking at Bucky's definition of universe. And it's a fascinating concept that we can extrapolate into the use for ourselves as we design anything. Because he's saying, if you start with the whole, then you go in and you can find other wholes, but they're all going to be smaller, and they're all going to be subsets of this big whole that he's calling universe. And he expands upon that statement by telling us nothing could have been left out when you start with the whole universe. So your axiomatic concept is that the universe is inclusive of it all. And then he tells us also that he says the universe is inferentially, it's the biggest system. So he is talking about systems upon systems upon systems, with universe being the biggest. By starting with universe, we automatically avoid leaving out any strategically critical variables. In the universe, everything is always in motion and everything is always moving in the directions of least resistance. That's a further statement in addition to the one of, nothing being left out. But he uses that and he tells us the universe is actually operating in an entirely different way from the way society thinks it is. So he's saying that we are living in a sort of fault, and that we think of it as a discontinuity, but he's reminding us that it's something that's ever moving, ever changing. And it takes us to several, concepts that we've explored, this idea of, if you're not moving, are you even living? So that forward, that movement is necessary to this concept of life. And he's saying, well, in that case, there is no contradiction here, because universe is constantly in motion. And he has this one line that I think it's great, soft, a lighter note to help you hear this concept. He says, to each of us, universe must be all that isn't me plus me. So, think of that. All that isn't me plus me. It's just another way of saying that nothing is left out here, not even yourself. So similarly vein, but moving on a little bit, he speaks about how the universe means towards oneness and implies a minimum of two-ness. So if we go back to the statement I just made, everything that isn't you plus you, 1 and 2. So there's more than one, because it's a system. So a system has to be more than one. And that's basically all he's saying here. Even though, it's the system, it's still a system. So some of the concepts you may have of system would work in thinking of it here. And he reminds us that universe does not have a shape. So, and he says, do not waste your time, as man has been doing for ages, trying to think of a unit shape outside of which there must be something, or within which at center there must be a smaller something. And the reason for this lack of shape is the concept we already discussed about this perpetual motion. And when he speaks about, these things that we conceptualize incorrectly, he also talks about the concept of finiteness versus infinite. He tells us universe cannot be infinite. It is finite. He goes on to redefine finite, and he contrasts finite with definite. So definite. He takes definite, he puts DE dash. And what he's saying is that's how he makes the separation between the known and the unknown. He doesn't use infinite because he says if we're talking a system, there must be a start and an end. And he believes that there is one in all of these systems, even if it's not one that you can perceive directly yourself. Now, he also speaks of universe as being he brings up this mathematical concept, and he calls it oddball oneness. And he's talking about the positive to negative relationship. And this is what he uses to explain to us and to show why the universe is finite versus infinite. Basically, he talks about, so energy, think of, we speak of energy, and entropy is when energy is wasted, right? But Bucky points out that it doesn't just magically disappear. If you have entropy here, what that actually means is that the energy is going somewhere else. It's not magically disappearing. It may be disappearing from your immediate view, but it exists still elsewhere. He uses that to show us that there is a finite, because the energy didn't increase or decrease. It shifted. So so what he says is, just when you think you are negative, you find you are positively so. And that's a little bit a tongue-in-cheek, I think, way of saying to you it's that concept that we've spoken of before in a variety of platforms here, that everything you touch touches you. There is a symbiotic relationship with almost everything. And that's what Bucky is using to show us that there's a finiteness. He doesn't mean it from like small or closed. He just means that there's a push and pull type of interaction between things. And this is why I believe that in everything that Bucky is saying about universe, to me, the biggest thing I'm getting out of it is the interconnectedness. I see, and you have to give me a few more months to fully flesh that out and say it with more confidence. But what I believe is that he's telling us that we have to remember for everything that it's all connected. And when we start to believe that certain aspects can be separated and considered outside of this concept of universe, we start to go wrong. And it creates problems that we can't even really fathom. So he says there's a lot of technical, I'm not even going to attempt to get into some of the technical aspects of what he's saying, because it's a fantastic job, but this is a little bit more high level and I would need a little more confidence. I just wanted to pull out for you some of the concepts I thought were really big. So still on this concept of finite, I love that he continues on. Now he takes several sections to make sure to drill this point into us. I really like that he says, so there's a section here that says, universe can only be thought of competently in terms of a great, unending, but finite scenario, whose as yet unfilled film strip is constantly self-regenerative. All experiences are terminated, ergo finite. An aggregate of finite is finite. Our universe is finite, but non-simultaneously conceptual. A moving picture scenario of non-simultaneous and only partially overlapping events. And then he says, one single picture, one frame does not tell the story. And that line made a lot of what he was saying click for me. The idea, we've talked about this before. I was like, that's what he's saying. So when you have one picture, you cannot possibly have the whole story. And that's what he's telling, and that's where he's getting at with universe. While as there is a story. So the story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. One picture doesn't give you all of that. It gives you one piece of the whole story. But just because it's one piece and you acknowledge that it's one piece, you can't just say that there's no way ever to know the whole story. You may not know the whole story, but that does not negate the fact that the whole story does in fact exist. And that's the point he's getting at, that he's trying to explain to us here. At least from my understanding. Somebody chime in if you understand it differently. And when I keep talking about the finite, because he really does spend a lot of time on it, he tells us that synergetics always commences its considerations and explorations with finite but non-unitarily conceptual scenario universe, which is inherently non-simultaneous. So scenario universe is a phrase that he uses throughout his sections of universe within the synergetics book to let us know that what we are using when we're looking at a system, it's a scenario, because he's saying one scenario of many. So when you hear scenario universe, one can presuppose that there exist more scenarios that one is not considering at this time, because you're looking at one scenario. But just because you're only looking at one scenario, it does not negate the fact that many other scenarios exist. So he uses that word there. Now, I'm going to go forward now to the next point that he moves on. He brings up for us, and he talks about, he spends a lot of time helping us to understand the differences from his definition of the physical versus the metaphysical, because these are the two parts that make up universe. And he says, all that is physical is energetic. All that is metaphysical is synergetic. He says the support of life on our planet consists of two kinds, metaphysical and physical. Both cosmic and terrestrial energetic regeneration, organic and inorganic, are physical, while the know-what of pure science and the know-how of applied science are both metaphysical. So there is a section, many pages after that, where he actually provides a table of things where he's spelling that out for you. He calls it metaphysical and physical summary. And there's a couple things there that I want to point out, because it's like they're antonyms. So he tells us conceptioning is metaphysical, sensing is physical, and the sensed is physical and always inherently special case. And he uses special case to show us that it's not something that you can apply to all things. Symmetry is metaphysical. Asymmetry is physical. Equilibrium is metaphysical. Disequilibrium is physical. Conceptuality is metaphysical and weightless. Reality is metaphysically conceptualized information transmitted only through physical senses. And then he says realizations are special case physical, brain sensed phenomena. He tells us generalization is metaphysical. Tools, artifacts, and humanly contrived extracorporeal facilities designed by mind are always special case, brain processed, physically sensible phenomena. So again, the thinking and the planning happens in the mind. Design happens in the mind. Metaphysical. Taking that design and making it happen, or making it reality, that's the physical aspect. So this is what he's showing us here. We can invent only physical. So that's just another way of saying the same thing. Metaphysically operative mind cannot design a generalized tool of unlimited and external capability. So that's, again, that's the idea. He's bringing us back to the idea of finite. He says that principles have no beginning, ending, or other temporal limitations. Principles are truths. That I feel like I could have an entire discussion alone on that statement. I think it's a very deep statement. And he's using it just to show us that those things which exist in your mind, at your very core, even principles, that's the metaphysical world of universe. And he's also saying that you can't have one without the other. So you cannot have the physical without the metaphysical. So design is metaphysical. Design implementation is physical. He tells us that the physical universe is a machine. He says, in fact, universe is the minimum and only perpetual motion machine. Universe is the minimum as well as the maximum closed system of omni-interacting, precessional transforming, complementary transactions of synergetic regeneration. Now that is a mouthful of a statement. What he's telling us here is that there's a minimum set of patterns, which is a consequence of one set of patterns reacting with another set of patterns. That's a simpler way of saying the same thing. Or he actually gives you an even simpler example. He says, in order to have a monkey wrench, you also have to make one or buy one at a store. You have to have other things, and these procurements in turn have antecedent event requirements. So he's talking about something I jokingly tell people, the dependency trees. So one time somebody asked me, Maritza, why don't you have a cat? You love cats. And I told them I would love to have a cat, but I get stuck on a dependency tree. I have to organize my basement. And they look at me all confused, like, in my mind, owning cat is here. Prior to getting here, though, I have all these other things that have to happen before we can get to this level, and I just never get through them. So I think that's a little bit of what he's saying here, the thing that there's an interconnectedness. Even when you think that, cleaning your basement may have absolutely nothing to do with cat ownership, if you follow the patterns, if you follow the threads and the dependencies of how did we get there or how do we want to get there, it does tie. I'm getting to the end here. I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing me speak. Sorry. It's just, this is so much. So he talks about the expanding universe, a lot. We did speak already a little bit about the concept of entropy and how he tells us about entropy and how entropy displaced shows up elsewhere. It's not actually magically gone. So it's a shifting type of energies as opposed to energies disappearing altogether. And so what the way he says it, he says, while energy leaves one local system after another, it does so only by joining other local systems. The energy is always 100% accountable. I think we forget that a lot in some of our day-to-day. And so if we remember that everything is systems, including humans, it's interesting to think of it in that manner. For example, everyone only has 24 hours in a day to work with when allotting time. So if somebody tells you, oh, you couldn't make time, well, you make time for those things that matter, right? So it's something that's, it's just a matter of, because you took extra time, playing with your friends instead of doing your homeworks, it doesn't mean now that you're going to have more time, or the time didn't actually disappear. We say that all the time, right? Time just flew by. It didn't literally fly. You just allotted it differently. And the same 24 hours are still there. On entropy, he also says that, and he redefines entropy a little bit. He says, and remember that he's using definite instead of definite, but that's where he's getting at with that. And he tells us the universe expands through progressively differentiating out and multiplying discrete considerations. All the differences between definite conceptual systems and finite, yet non-conceptual total universe seem to provide a fundamental means of identifying the physical phenomenon entropy. Entropy no longer means inherent escape of energy from any local system, or decrease of local order, or increase to disorder. Entropy now means the invisible extraction from any local definitive system of the negative conceptual entity. For example, one negative tetrahedron deposited into universe. Balance of energy conservation, permitting the local extraction of any visible, orderly conceptual system. Entropy is not random. It is always one negative tetrahedron. It can account finitely for any discrete rate of energy loss. And that's his more technical way of saying what I was just explaining to you guys. So he reminds us very far into at the end here, he reminds us our original definition of universe is a finite but non-simultaneously occurring aggregate of all human experiences, which is therefore a non-conceptual total universe. It is logical to proceed from this definition to discover the patterning characteristics of the first conceptual subdivision of universe into a structural system. So with that, he goes on to give us an example of how he speaks of the principle of synergetic advantage, which he doesn't define that in this section, but he says that conceptuality requires the generalization of patterns gleaned from special case experiences. And I'll remind you that he says special case is something that we cannot assume that if it applies to one, it applies to all. He says conceptuality defines the basic event experiences and quantum unit measurement, which altogether constitute structure. The complex of event sequences is most often characterized by overlappings. A man is born, grows up, has children and grandchildren. His life overlaps that of his grandfather and father, and that of his children and grandchildren. But his grandfather's life did not overlap his children's nor his grandchildren's lives, hence partially overlapping. Man matches the universe in displaying the same relative abundance of the 92 self-regenerative chemical elements. I didn't get into that, so I don't want to confuse you there. He says, whether communication is by telephone or by wireless radio, what you and I transmit is only weightless metaphysical information. Metaphysical information appreciative. You and I are not the telephones, nor the wired or wireless means of the metaphysical information transmitting. And that's how he ends it. He ends it by driving again the point of separation between the physical and the metaphysical. And I am hoping, Shrikant, that I did not totally butcher that. And that's my understanding of his definition of universe.
Thank you, Maritza. That was just wonderful, because it is truly a unique way of thinking about universe. And what I want to do today is to just keep focused on that. I don't want to hear, this is what I think about universe, because that's not the point. I think we will actually get completely distracted. Let us first try to understand what Buckminster Fuller is saying. Let us keep the discussion focused on that. So that's what I would like to do. So what I want to do, Maritza, is that I want to interact with you a little bit on some of the highlights that I saw in everything that you said. And
Okay.
I will go ahead and say a few things, and please respond to that. And then we'll go to the next one, folks, it's a way of, it's like a review, not just review, but it's like a retake on the same thing, because it's just so much that this is kind of another way, taken through another consciousness, which is, Maritza's consciousness is different than my consciousness. So I'm doing the same thing, because one of the key points of the definition here is that it is multiple consciousnesses, and it is the overlapping and intersection. It is the aggregate of what all of us are going to be doing. Okay, so I want to set a pattern here where we keep focused on just what Bucky is saying, but we state it in our own ways of saying, this is what I hear him say. Okay, and we will keep adding to that. Okay, so the first thing that stands out is that you always start with the universe. Now that, you start with the whole. When you start with the whole, you will not miss anything. Now that was the one point that really stood out. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. It's the idea of, it's funny because that idea was one that I struggled with a little bit when CJ brought it up to us. We had a whole discussion on it and the whole shebang, right? I struggled a little bit until I saw it, and it was going through some of Bucky's concepts that helped me understand that, it's just it's applicable to a lot of different things.
Second thing I want to do is I want to reread the definition of universe and keep on making it simpler and simpler by seeing what can be removed. Okay, so to see the pattern of it, okay, because it is too long, it is making so many different points. So I want to leave out some of the points and look at just the spine of it and then keep adding to it. Okay, so if you will indulge me, Maritza, go ahead and read out the definition and just read it a little bit slowly, and then we'll drop some of the words and read it again, and drop some words and read it again, and then see what we see.
Okay. Universe is the aggregate of all humanities concisely.
Okay, just a second. Okay, how about this? We do this iteratively. Okay, so let's go word by word, and we will actually kind of promote some of the words.
Okay.
And then say, okay, the other words are kind of come at the second level. Aggregate, I think, is crucial. So can you begin again?
Yep. Universe is the aggregate.
Okay, so this itself, it is an aggregate. Okay, and then at the end, it talks about experience. So it is really aggregate of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the one thing I'm seeing, aggregate of experience. Okay, now let's go to the next word. So it is the aggregate.
Universe is the aggregate of all humanities consciously apprehended.
Okay, just a second. So now this is again something which is really unusual. So firstly, it is all humanities. Okay, so basically what humanity has done, all humanity has done, is relevant, is part of this concept and consciously apprehended. Okay, now other people don't think of this part at all.
He defines both of those words, though, in the next section immediately.
Yes. So consciously apprehended. Okay, so far I have aggregate, then experience it from the end, all humanities, consciously apprehended. Go ahead. What's next?
Universe is the aggregate of all humanities consciously apprehended and communicated.
Okay, so now this is communicated. So it's not just apprehended, but communicated. Okay, go on.
Before I go on, I'm going to go rogue for a second.
Sure.
I just want to mention that he defines consciousness and communicated using a definition that is symbiotic. He says, consciousness means an awareness of otherness. Communicated means informing self or others.
Okay. So there is so let's just say includes otherness as the
Yes.
point that is here.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
universe is the aggregate of all humanities consciously apprehended and communicated, non-simultaneous, and only partially overlapping experiences.
Okay, so this is kind of the other part is non-simultaneous
Yep, non-simultaneous
and partially overlapping.
and only partially overlapping.
So we'll just say partially overlapping.
Mm-hmm.
And then experience. Now, experience is important because if you look at the grammar of it, so universe is experience.
Mm-hmm.
It is the aggregate. So what do we have here? So it is the aggregate of experience. It is aggregate of all of humanity's experience. It is the aggregate of all humanity's consciously apprehended experience. It is all humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated experience. It is aggregate of all humanity's consciously apprehended and communicated, non-simultaneous and partially overlapping experience. So I will put this non-simultaneous and partially overlapping towards the end. So I find this useful. I don't know, Maritza, do you find this useful?
Yes.
Kind of just looking
You
at
know,
it in
should
ways like this?
try the definition, take out the word aggregate and put in the word sum.
Some, okay.
And then we'll take out, let's see. I'm just thinking if we put in simpler words, these are, I mean, he defines aggregate, consciousness, apprehension, communicated, and non-simultaneous. But what that tells me is that the need for defining them means that to the average person, even Bucky understood that there was some ambiguity. So if we could take the definition and supplant a simple word, it might make it easier for others.
I think it will be harder for others.
You think? Well then maybe.
Because what happens is that, the word aggregate, consider what, compare the word aggregate to sum. See, aggregate, the connotations, because he's actually spent a lot of time capturing the connotations exactly way he wants it. And he also knows the way in which people would normally think of it and all kinds of connotations that would come up with it, which is not what he's wanting.
Okay.
So it's like, it's not, what he's saying is that it's not exactly sum. It's like things being brought together. You don't know the one of it. Sum kind of connotes that you have something that puts everything together, and this is the one thing. You don't have that. You have an aggregate.
He does define it as sum. He says aggregate means sum.
Yeah, but the thing is that what I'm saying is that the connotations, I would, I think that he's using not just this particular words. I think he's using all his words in a very deliberate way. Because if you just look at the sentence, right? This is a very unusual way of writing a sentence. Okay. And he does that deliberately throughout all his work.
Yes, yes, he does.
What is it that he's doing? Because I think one of the things he's doing is that he's actually pushing away the normal way in which people would think. And by using this unusual combination of words, is pointing to something else. So I think if we stick with his own words, we would be better able to get at his. Does this make sense to you?
Yes, yes, it does.
Okay. So this is the definition. Now I want to just make a few points. So first, other points. I mean, the thing is that this is just such an incredible thing, Maritza. I mean, this whole thing. So one part of it is you talked about the motion. And that reminds me of he's saying, I am a verb. God is a verb. So in a sense, this is saying universe is a verb. That, universe is energy. And that part kind of comes through. It is interaction. It is conversation. It is an active thing, not a passive thing. So that is one thing, one pattern that I see. What do you think?
Yes, that's exactly the way I would view that as well.
Then another point, see, you were able to actually pick out some really, really deep themes in what he's saying, even though when they were, expressed parenthetically inside like definitions of something else. One of the themes that you picked up is not me and me.
Yes, I love that line. I find it to be so impactful, honestly.
Because typically the way in which people think of universe is that, oh, there is universe and there is me. So what he's saying is that no, it includes you, it includes all the others, and it's not just between you and the physical world. Other people are part of this. Okay, the next one is the point about interaction, this back and forth that is happening. I like to call it conversation, but it's this, everything is kind of reciprocal, everything reciprocally influencing each other, and seeing that that is the movement that is taking place, not one way, one direction, but bi-directional. Everything is reciprocal. I think that's a very crucial way he's thinking. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yes. Honestly, Shrikant, I think that's the thread that is interwoven in everything he's saying here.
Excellent. Next is the idea of scenarios. I think that is also a very deep concept, because it is not just what is, it is you're playing out scenarios. All your consciously apprehended parts includes various scenarios. And those scenarios, it expands, it brings in consciousness, and what the consciousness does into his definition of universe in a very deep way. He's put it in the definition of consciously apprehended, communicated. That's very unusual. But this theme goes through and through. And the place where it really speaks loudest is his saying it is physical and metaphysical. That is probably one of the deepest things, because it's like saying that it is physical and it is metaphysical at the same time. Principles are operative and principles are metaphysical. They're conceptualized. And they're conceptualized from reality, and they're going back to reality in transforming reality. And there is this system of physical and metaphysical, of perceptual and conceptual, of action and thought, is one system. And universe encompasses this entire system. What do you think of this idea of physical and metaphysical?
Yeah, I think it's a great way for us to separate those two concepts, especially since he does a fantastic job of showing that there's a relation still to the medical and the physical. I love that he tells us, he says, you cannot get out of the universe. And also, Shrikant, in his section on scenario universe, he takes a moment and he types it uni-verse. And he says, uni-verse is a momentarily glimpsed special case systemic episode takeout. And he's, that's like another way of showing us that the scenario is not all of it.
Wonderful. I'll just make one comment, and then folks would love for you to again just focus on trying to speak about what you understand of what Bucky is doing. Okay. I find this to be poetic. He's using so much poetry, so many metaphors in trying to show you what this is. And it's just incredibly beautiful. So folks, I would love your comments. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. Let's see. We had Eleanor followed by Katie. Eleanor, go ahead.
Yeah, I was making some notes here about one picture cannot tell the story. And I found online an exact quote from Bucky, which says, "There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. Who knows what can become, what man can become." Yes, I agree absolutely to it, but I also think that it has this particular expression, one picture cannot tell the story, has two different tales. If you look at a state of a moment, then it's maybe true that the picture just tells a state, and you cannot imagine a previous state. You need imagination or fantasy, and it's up to you. It's all about your projection, personal projection. So therefore, one picture can have multiple interpretations created by different consciousnesses. And an interpretation is like an eye, and an interpretation is like a segment. Therefore, it tells a story in a moment. But Bucky is obviously, as I understand, using a little bit different approach to explain that time cannot be managed by a picture, which is true. But a moment can be managed by a picture. So therefore, I do agree on it, but at the same time, it's a very critical sentence or statement of it. And I kind of think yes and no. So we'll see.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Eleanor.
Shrikant, if I can throw in, since she mentioned it in the same section, scenario universe, he does address a little bit the time. He says, time is only now. Time and size are always special case, asymmetric episodes of now whose systemic aberrations are referenced to the cosmic hierarchy of primitive and symmetrical geometries through which they pulsate actively and passively, but at which they never stop. I think that kind of gives you the idea of, he's saying exactly what you were presupposing, Eleanor, the idea that it's, it's that glimpse now, but you have to understand it's constantly moving, so it's not going to stay there.
Thank you. Thank you. So folks, let us try to first understand Bucky, and then what we can do is we'll do an entire section on critiques of Bucky, of how you think about Bucky, different than Bucky. Let's first try to get what Bucky is saying, okay, about each of these things, and then we will go ahead and talk about our own thinking about the universe. So they will do it in two stages, okay? So Katie followed by Paul, and you're welcome to ask questions. I don't know whether we'll be able to answer them, but you're welcome to ask questions or make comments, whatever you like. Go ahead, Katie.
I can't quite articulate it, but I'm going to try to articulate what I'm trying to think out. I think when somebody says like, oh, that person's in their own world, they're kind of saying like they're limited to their own thoughts and their own experiences. And I think what he's getting at with the universe is just something bigger and has all the experiences that would kind of contribute to something shared.
Thank you, Katie. That's a great point. I think that's a crucial point of what he's saying. What he's saying is that don't be caught in your own world. Take on take on everything. He's saying, listen to what other people are saying. Not just listen to some people around you, but listen to all of humanity's speech. Take all of that in. And that, you regard that as the universe. That is the starting point. And that's a way of not being caught in your own world. So it is very profoundly open to multiple viewpoints and trying to integrate them in a synergetic way. Maritza, would you like to add anything? Okay. Next up is Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I want to try to understand it. There's a way I have of understanding, not so much how he expands it, but how he limits it. And I want to see if you guys, what you think, because that's sort of tricky, this thing about what can be, the sum total, the aggregate of all things comprehended, or however he puts that. But I want to hear what you have to say, because I have not read Synergetics, and I'm getting what I'm thinking about from Critical Path. And he does this really like mind-bending, beautiful thing of saying that we are experiments, that God invented a thing, a consciousness, humans, that can partially apprehend principles, pure principles, but not completely. So I'm tying this to that and asking you if that's legitimate, that he's saying, let's not have so much hubris that we think we can actually understand everything, but let's limit ourselves to what not even has ever been, but could possibly be apprehended by the human consciousness. Is that a legitimate way to think about it, is my question.
Maritza, would you like to answer it? I have things to say, but would love to hear what you have.
I will give a very small stab at this. I think that what he's saying is that even if you can't, as long as it's finite, you don't have to be able to envision it. It's encompassed already within universe. So when you start with universe, you can't leave anything out. So just because you, Paul, could not have conceived of it, doesn't mean that it didn't exist within that banner of universe.
What the way I understand Bucky, because I think this is really very deep. This concept of universe, his concept of God, his transcendentalism, all of it is just one thing, because this is like a foundational concept in his thought. And what he's saying is few things. On one hand, there is tremendous humility, because you're saying universe is aggregate of all humanities. Okay, now all humanities, you don't know all humanity, and it's still part of it. So this clearly there is a lot more than you know. Okay, so that it emphasizes that part. So universe is very large, because it includes this not intersection, but a union of all people, all their actions, all their thoughts in the physical world. It includes all of thought. It includes all of the concepts ever developed, ever used, and all of the actions that have been taken. At the same time, he's saying that there is something, you use the word God, there is something divine in us, that we are able to see principles. I mean, what an amazing thing that we can understand principles of operation. of things. Understand some things, we don't understand everything. But it allows us to see. So that's what he's talking about, metaphysical. So he's saying that consciousness is something different, as distinguished to just physical things. We can do something that a rock can't, or a plant can't. We can understand principles. So on one hand, it is a very optimistic. It is not, I should not use the word optimistic. It is an uplifting view of human beings. On the other hand, it is a profoundly humble view of human beings. So you're saying, I am experimenting. I don't know everything. I am experimenting. And this is the universe that I'm interacting with. And what he does in all his thinking is that he uses the universe as a reference point. He's saying, what is right thing to do based on universe? So it's like he's using, and it's a very interesting combination of kind of perceptual base and the conceptual base dealt with in a very interesting way. I don't think I understand it too well, but that's the general area, I would say. Next, let's go to Mona. Folks would love to hear any of your thoughts about what is he saying? What do you think is interesting about what he's saying? What are you getting from it? Go ahead, Mona.
Okay. What I heard from this definition, I mean, there's a lot, but what stood out to me is that everything relates to perception or conception or thought, and it's all about humanity. But what if, I mean, I don't know how to think about it, but say my cat like exists because I perceive it, or does it have its own consciousness that has its own universe building around it, and that's also part of the universe, independent of me perceiving it, or anyone else perceiving it. So I'm curious about this restriction about like all humanity's thoughts and feelings and perceptions. What about the rest of the sentient world?
Cool. Maritza, would you like to take that?
Oh man, I don't know if I'm qualified. No, so he does say that humanity is a subset of universe. So I think that there's room within there, because if we remember, you can't have left anything out of universe. So that means that there has to be room, even if he did not explicitly state it. We have to presuppose that there exists in that umbrella space for other. That's my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, it is interesting, Mona. I think you put your finger on something really deep here, because when you say consciously comprehended, right? Are you saying that if there is a galaxy out there that nobody has consciously comprehended, is that part of universe, or is it not part of universe? Right? So it's a very different. So in some ways, his concept of universe is closer to other people's concept of culture, like world culture. Okay, that's what he's referring to. So it is very different kind of a concept, and it's a very odd combination of things he's using. So he's saying, I mean, like for example, like let's take a very simple thing, like galaxy that nobody has ever seen, right? And there's clearly those things, and those are, and it is not in our experience. No human being has seen it. There is no experience of it. There is no conscious apprehension of it. There is no communication of it. There is no overlap. There is nothing happens. Can't be simultaneous, right? So it is closer. So in this way, it is closer to the concept of world culture, the total culture, humanity's culture. And that is the focus he has for all his work, actually. Whereas the the principles, the common principles through which the universe operates are being captured conceptually. I don't know, Mona, is that useful?
Yes. I suppose that I'm bringing up my own stories and things that other things that I know, but I'm trying to stick
Yeah.
with what I heard
No,
here.
no, exactly. I think you're right, and the cat would be included because cat is a pet. The cat is operating in the context of various places like basements, for example, and so it's part of the human equation. So you may not know everything about it. So there would be kind of partially overlapping things. You do not know everything about everything, and there are things that nobody knows about, and so there is this kind of overlapping thing. And I thought, the point about the overlapping is very interesting, that it's not just a snapshot. It is all these snapshots of everybody, and that happening over time. So it's like this kind of, instead of a snapshot, you have like a movie, and it's instead of a movie, you have all these movies playing at all times, and they're all 3D, and it's kind of a 4D kind of a sculpture, something like that.
If I can just, before you move on, I just want to jump in here and also say that, so he defines consciousness as, he says, consciousness means an awareness of otherness. To me, that definition helped solidify the idea of universe encompassing, yes, even those galaxies that I cannot think of, or if there exists extraterrestrial beings that I cannot possibly comprehend, the awareness of others would include that. So if at some point it becomes more of a reality thing, it's already part of it. So my entire worldview doesn't have to, collapse.
Excellent point. So that is exactly how, what I was saying was about perceptual. When you add conceptual to it, you know the nature of galaxies, how they are, where they are, and then conceptually you can say that, look, there are more galaxies than this, and that is included. And moment you say that, then that becomes part of the universe. What wonderfully put. That's excellent point. It's a good correction to what I was saying. Excellent. Next up is Rupali.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to say, I was really amazed to see his definition of universe, not as a collection of stars and galaxies, but a collection of humanity's experiences. And so it truly is our consciousness that perceives the universe. And it's just such a shift from what we learn in science classes about what is the universe, right? So that's one thing that I found very fascinating. The second thing is the relation of self to the other self. And it reminds me of Walt Whitman's poem, Song to Myself, and how he relates to the other self in that. So that it was just something that was a connection to me. And the interdependence that Maritza, you spoke about it. There are so many things, but I'll stop at this point. The interconnectedness and the interdependence with all systems in the universe that perhaps we ignore. And I'll probably be talking about this on Sunday, is the Montessori lesson on interdependence, that you're not just acting on your own, but you're part of a system. And perhaps, in our limited vision, we might think, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. But there is so much more happening around you that's helping you do it. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rupali. Again, I really like Maritza, your point, because it actually does several things. See, when you look at this galaxy you can't see, okay, and saying it's part of the universe because I conceptualized it. Actually, it's a cleaner way of saying this is based on my ideas about how things are, because then you can evaluate those ideas and you can say, okay, other people had these ideas, I have these ideas, which of them are consistent with principles, which are consistent with natural laws as I know them. As your understanding of natural law will grow, you are saying that, okay, this is part of the universe and this is not, will also keep changing. So excellent points. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to open it up a little bit more. I would love to hear from anybody about whatever you have heard. I mean, one of the things that I really liked about how Mona approached it, it's like, you heard Maritza talk a lot about universe, of what Bucky said about universe. What of this did you find particularly interesting? Anything that you found interesting? Let's just talk about that for some time. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you'd like to share what you found interesting and why did you find it interesting. Anything that you would like to say. We'll start with Mona.
Oh my goodness. Where to start? What I found interesting was that, well, starting with the whole, right? Universe is everything. And then we're trying to come up with a definition that's made of the parts, because everything that we can say is just part of, right? It's not the whole thing. And then he always also says everything is ever moving, ever shifting, evolving. What about the definition? I'm wondering, like, he took such a long time to develop it and to make it comprehensive and cover all the bases that I think, and make it something solid. And then the next thing he says, nothing is solid. So I find that fascinating, that one could hold these paradox in the mind and still make a universe out of it.
Yes, I mean, this is really the great scientific mindset that all great scientists have. They formulate things as best as they can, but they're always saying, what is the truth? What is the truth? And they're focused on that. So let me just see what is going on. Give me a second here. Hold on.
Took care of it, she got.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, it's a great point. And the way it is that actually you find some of the greatest scientists actually have the same humility. My favorite quote from a scientist is the one by Newton at the end of his life. He says, I don't know how others perceive me, but as to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore who found a shell that was more prettier than another, while the entire ocean remains unexplored. Okay, that was what he said at the end of his life. So that is exactly what it is. All right, next up is Jyoti.
Can I throw something in there before we move on, just for a moment? I noticed, Mona, I noticed in the throughout the section, because he has many sections in here. It starts at 300 and it goes all the way through. There's like 40 pages in synergetics. I found that he kept starting paragraphs with saying universe is, and I was like, is he giving me new definitions? I think softly he might be. I think that he is aware of exactly what you said. He's aware that it too cannot be static, because as you go through, and it takes a while, it takes a minute for your brain to comprehend that you're seeing it, because at first, sometimes it seems like he's just explaining something. But, you know, so we start at 301.10 is that definition, the big, heavy, you know, universe is the aggregate. But then at just, you know, 308, he says universe is finite because, and that seems, okay, that's maybe not a definition, but at 309, he tells us universe is the minimum of intertransformance necessary for total self-regeneration. And you're like, well, that sounds like a definition. And it happens throughout the next like 40 pages. There are these little sentences where he tells you what, he gives another little definition. And if you pull them all into a separate page, because, you know, you may feel inclined to do so, as I did, it seemed none of them are in contradiction, but they all have a slightly different spin, or they add something. And in addition to that, he has another set of universe is statements or universe is not statements woven throughout this whole section. So I think he spends, in addition to, you know, explaining universe to us, he spends time where he really, truly just kind of adds to his definition softly. Like he wants that main one to be the main one, and that's why he starts with that. And he ends with that one also. But in between, he gives you, I think, other definitions that are kind of like sisters to the original.
The best way of seeing this is poetry. See, he's a poet, okay? And when you're trying to talk about something as deep as the universe, it is the same issue as you're talking about love. And when you're talking about love, you say, love is like a red rose. And that captures a whole bunch of things. And then you would use another metaphor for it, and another metaphor for it, another metaphor for it. All of them are perspectives on the same thing. And approaching it that way allows you to explore different aspects of it. That is there inherent in the nature of metaphors themselves, in the nature of language itself. This idea of definitions that most people have is a very modern notion. It's an analytical notion. He is going back. Implicitly, he's using something which is there, much older. You see that in Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching is full of metaphors. What is Tao like? It's like, be like water. Be like a child. You know, be like a forest and a mountain and fire. And what are you doing? Because you're actually showing different aspects of the Tao. You know, be like the valley, the lowest point. And all of that, just like Tao Te Ching has this entire palette of metaphors, so does Bucky. Not only to talk about this concept, but pretty much every concept. So if you read him, you need to get the poetry that he has. When somebody is trying to grapple at something which is at the edge of their capability, which is what we are, which is the situation we are when we're talking about something like universe. Poetry is what you end up using. That's very natural. And that's what he's doing. All right, thank you, Mona. Was that helpful?
Yeah.
Thank you. Next up is Jyoti, followed by Paul. Jyoti.
Okay, thank you, Marissa and Shrikant. You're, I'm illiterate in Becky's concepts and what have you. You're trying to simplify it. And what I'm trying to get out of it is, it's not any different than spirituality. Like in Gita, we say, Om, Brahma, I'm part of Brahma, and Brahma is in me. And that's what Becky's saying, that universe, I'm part of the universe, and the universe is in me. Everybody's experiences and everybody's divinity counts, it matters. And it makes the universe. And there is a connection. We all are interconnected with each other because what we are experiencing is nothing new. It could be a byproduct of some other experiences that other people have gone through. And they have made, to say, like a fertile ground for us. And we can now, on that ground, make some decisions. There are patterns in life. Those patterns are there for a reason. They are a connection between your childhood, your adulthood, and what have you. So everything from what you are talking about universe, everything matters. You matter, everything else around it matters. Divinity matters, humanity matters. This is my take from what you are trying to tell. Maybe I got it all wrong. Thank you.
Thank you, Jyoti. The middle term here between Bucky and spirituality is transcendentalism. He is heavily influenced by transcendentalism. And transcendentalism is simply saying like that Brahma or the metaphysical or natural principles are operative in everything. So each thing, each person, the concrete, perceptual, is a manifestation of these eternal principles. And you go back and forth, like transcendentalists go back and forth. So it's this idea of physical and metaphysical, talking about it in the same breath, is very much similar to what you find in both, like all of this, like New Testament, Tao Te Ching, or Bhagavad Gita. Like the way in which it appears in Tao Te Ching is that there is the Tao, which is metaphysical. It is like God, the Tao, and a sage has the Tao flowing through him like water. And so he is a particular person through which the Tao is flowing. So you're on the right track. And the beautiful thing is that actually kind of the older version of science before modern times, before very recent times, all the great scientists, whether you look at Einstein, for example, you can see that they are trying to relate the physical and the metaphysical all the time. They're always saying, I don't know the natural laws. I want to understand the natural laws. And everything that I'm seeing is a clue to what it is. So there is a loyalty that they have to perception, to sensory data, to this world, and there is a loyalty that they have to the metaphysical, the principle, eternal principles that are underlying it. So thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is going to be Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, in terms of what I liked, there's a lot that was just said by the last, all of you, that are what I liked, but what Maritza said in particularly helped me, and then Shrikant elaborated on, appreciate this more in that when I asked that first question, I was trying to reconcile all his concepts of universe to make them consistent. And when Maritza pointed out, he might be hinting at, don't try to do that. And that helped me because, like the universe as me and everything that's not me, the mind wants to contrast that to the universe as the sub-aggregate of all comprehended experiences. And then say, which did he mean? And that's just the wrong way to think about it. And I appreciate that about him. And you guys helped me appreciate that, and his kind of noble mission to do what he says in the other stuff I've read is impossible. God gave us only partial ability, in the way he puts it, to understand the pure principles in their entirety. So our job is this noble mission that scientists go on, and he went on. And you've got to keep trying. Universe is, universe is, universe is. Rewrite the Lord's Prayer every night. It's just like wildly poetic and beautiful. So that's what I appreciate about it. His noble effort.
That was wonderful, wonderful comment, Paul. That is exactly the spirit of what he's doing. And that is his greatness, you know. And that way of thinking actually is the way of thinking in the axial age. So like when you look at Bhagavad Gita, they're trying to do the same thing. When you look at Tao Te Ching, they're trying to do the same thing. They're not saying, be like water. Okay, then what about, you know, what about mountain? Is that mountain not Tao? It doesn't, you don't think like that. But you understand that water is just a metaphor. It's not a model. See, the way in which modern mind thinks, give me a model. And then to the hell with what it is the model of. They're trying to capture reality in a model or an idol or an idea, which they say, I know everything now because I have this thing. And then stop paying attention to reality, to God, to everything else. And then you're holding on to that idea for dear life. And and it is all one-dimensional. Whereas this is actually appreciative of the complexity of what you're dealing with, the richness, the abundance of what you're dealing with. And so you get something and you say, this is real, but it doesn't stop you from saying that there are more real things about what I'm talking about. You know, I see this, but that doesn't mean that that's all that there is, because that elephant has all these different parts. And if I take in all people who are looking at the elephant and touching the elephant, that is closer to the universe. And so I'm actually inviting all of that. So it's very, very beautifully put. And what happens is that the modern world is all about privileging whatever ideas you have come up with. And the simple thing, for example, I talked about Newton, how he saw Newton's laws, okay? That was his view of Newton's laws. Everybody else said, we have Newton's laws, now we understand everything, okay? He's saying, no, we don't understand everything. We understand that a shell is shinier, okay? Everybody, the whole civilization after that, saying, now everything is billiard balls, now people are billiard balls. So they use that as a metaphor for saying, okay, the mind is like that, human beings are like that, everything is like that, sun is like that, and none of them are. So that's exactly, I mean, it's And what happens is that it's also very, you called it, really beautifully poetic. And that's exactly what it is. Because it is poetic. Again, this is, Phil did this amazing series on language. And there is this gentleman called Owen Barfield. And he says that it is the aesthetic experience when you read something beautiful poetically and you say, that's beautiful. It is exactly the same instance that you grasp something that you've not grasped before. You see something new. And that is your emotional reaction to that. Now, what he's saying is that universe is this wondrous thing. And one of the key things he's saying about himself, I am guinea pig B. I am an experiment. I will understand as best as I can. I'm serious about what I'm understanding. So I'm going to live by it. And I know this is an experiment. And I will do it because that's the best thing I can do. So Paul, great comments. Thank you.
So
Next, go ahead.
Shrikant, I feel like this is the perfect moment for a poem.
Please.
So Buckminster Fuller wrote this poem, and it's about the universe. Environment to each must be all there is. That isn't me. Universe in turn must be all that isn't me and me. Since I only see inside of me, what brain imagines outside me, it seems to be you may be me. If that is so, there's only we, me and we too, which love makes three, universe, perma embracing, it, them, you, and we. So
Wow.
that's his thoughts on universe in
Wow.
a slightly more poetic form.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Mona.
Yes, I really, really love this discussion because it puts a really big dent in this idea that, I struggled with about an objective reality where that could exist independent of me. Because in this definition, everything seems to be interdependent. My perception, your perception, everyone's perception and thoughts and everything together. So that objective reality is something that doesn't make any sense anymore in this case, because it all is a combination of perceptions that are all subjective. And the multitude of all subjective aggregate, or what's the word, aggregate of subjective experiences, but where is the objective? Like, I don't see the objective anymore. It's just what emerges from all of us. And that seems to have to do with consciousness. Like, how do we, what are we conscious of? And then how does that happen? I don't know. But it just put a big dent on it for me.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to pick up a slightly different theme related to this. When people think about ideas, they think of ideas as things. Just like there are things outside, they think of everything in terms of things that are outside. They think of ideas also in terms of things. One of the fundamental change of perspectives that Bucky brings is that looking at everything as a verb, not just things outside, but even your ideas. And there is this entire flow that is going on. Because we have a tendency of, what I would call nounizing everything. Just make something into a noun, and then it is dead. You can hold on to it. You know exactly what it is. You can say, oh, that's what it is. Okay. But fundamentally, life is action. Universe is action. It's a verb. It's a flowing thing. it has form. It has form, but it is a flowing thing. It is flowing. So it is a verb. And what his entire approach in so many different beautiful ways is to show the grandeur of that. Actually patterns emerge from it. And the patterns that emerge from it have a stability because they are patterns of flow. And those are very different. Those, what he calls principles. But those kind of ride on the top of this massive flow. And it's a pattern of the flows. So it's switching between static and dynamic. So it's a very profound, great comment. All right, folks, anybody else? Would love to hear from anybody else about what they found interesting about Bucky's thoughts about the universe. Okay, while people are preparing to answer, and you can bring up anything that you want at this point. Let me ask Marisa, firstly, let me tell you about some amazing meetups coming up. If Rupali, are you able to talk now?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to can you give a preview about what you're planning to do?
Sure.
The next
Sure.
meetup, Bucky meetup, is going to be Rupali at 1 p.m. Eastern time next Sunday. So the coming Sunday. So Rupali, what are you going to do?
So both Buckminster Fuller and Maria Montessori believe that the child holds the potential to be a creator. And they both have arrived at these conclusions from their own experiences, from their own thinking and their own observations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of Maria Montessori's ideas and the way she uses lessons in the classroom to showcase the human potential and how it relates to the larger world. Like, how is the child part of this world? Before Maria Montessori's time, the child existed in the adult world. The world existed for the adults. And she was the first person to say, let us make this for the child. Because if the child is successful, humanity will be successful. Now, Buckminster Fuller says, be childlike, always be, dare to be naive or dare to, just be curious. Think for yourself. How do you teach? You don't have to wait to be 32 years old to figure out that I want to think for myself. So how does Montessori help children learn to think? And it comes from doing the action. You were talking about being a verb. A Montessori child is always doing things. And through that doing, they're making connections with the world. And that transformation is just amazing to watch. And the child is truly unfolding. And so I'm going to be talking about that process. I will also show some of the construction that children do and how they like to experience nature and build, and why those experiences are important. For example, our students built a geodesic dome. You can build a geodesic dome with newspaper. You can build it with wood. You can build it with any material. It's how even a kindergarten student can build. So how do you make, a flat 2-dimensional shape like a triangle into a 3-dimensional shape like a dome, which then has an inside and outside? So all of these topics. We'll talk about that. And yeah, we'll see where it goes. I'm hoping to invite a couple of my students to come in and talk, but I'm not sure. It's a Sunday afternoon, so not sure what they will be doing. Thank you.
Shrikant, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you, Rupali. I'm really looking forward to it. We've got some amazing presentations coming up after Rupali's. On 21st, Kurt McNamara is going to be back to continue his series on the book on Bucky. And 28th is going to be Pat Ravasio. She's written a book called, I think, Girl from Spaceship Earth. And she's going to be talking about the life principles that she learned from Bucky while writing the book. Okay. The next one is going to be June 4th. And that's going to be Joe Clinton. Joe Clinton actually worked closely with CJ on the Synergetic Collaborative. He worked with Buckminster Fuller for several years. He's going to be talking about synergetics as how nature works. So principles of synergetics is how nature works. And I'm also very happy to announce that we have Strupi has agreed to do a monthly meetup. Now, Strupi is in Germany. So that meetup is going to be on the fourth Sunday at 1 p.m. And this is in addition to everything else that we will do. He said that he wanted to interact more with us. So I thought that he certainly is brilliant. He brings so much to the table. So I wanted to give him a regular monthly slot. And so it's going to be really, really good. So if you have not watched Strupi present, it's a treat. I mean, I learned a lot from working with all these models. Now my house is full of these things, just building things. And it's very easy to do actually. And it's by learning to see how these patterns are and what the limits are that you actually understand how these things are put together. So that's what is coming up. Marissa, do you have some ideas about the topics that you're considering in this series?
I have I have a few really clarity. I was thinking cosmic plurality as one.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was thinking for the next. Integrity is another one I'd like to tackle. So those are the two that I have kind of been working on. There are things though that I've been pulling out of this section of universe that I may want to go into. Interestingly enough, when I was talking about objectivity and subjectivity, that's something for me. Like, I've always held a firm thought that we have to embrace the objectivity. In this in his section on universe, he does at least to me, I see him kind of advocating for the necessity of both. He's not eschewing one over the other. And I was wondering, I don't know yet, but I had the soft thought that if I could make that a whole discussion type of topic, if I pull out his views of subjectivity and objectivity throughout a variety of his works. So just another thought.
Sure. Excellent. Jeff has a point. Jeff, go ahead.
Hi, Shrikant. Hi, Maritza. Thanks for a really wonderful and thought-provoking presentation and discussion this evening. So I was just trying to draft. What would I share about what of this was so, I think, thoughtful and brilliant and provocative. And so, for better or worse, here's sort of what I ended up with. As with all things, it's a draft. So to start and stay with an ever-changing universe, of which both I and all others are and will be ever-changing parts. And since my own experiences and vantage points are but a small part of the whole of human experience, all conclusions are temporary. And stay humble. And when I find people who have a different perspective or different perspectives from me, to be and stay curious. So that's a brief draft on some of the things that I take from this conversation. But thank you so much for it.
Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate it. Marissa, so I like the topic of integrity is a very, very deep topic, because what it is that like this question of like subjective objective, actually the way in which he solves it is very different. Like the modern world, because it is so materialistic, it thinks there is matter and then there is subjectivity, which is completely different, and that's how it looks at it. It sees it as a problem. The Tao doesn't see it as a problem. Bhagavad Gita doesn't see it as a problem, because all of that way of thinking itself is integrated. So this idea of reality and your own experience of it, the relationship between them, it is seen as an integrity. It is seen as an integrity. So it's very different. I mean, that is the thing that we found common to the three things that we're studying, as compared to modern thinking. So the same problem, the way in which Mona phrased it, it's a very modern way of phrasing it. What these works do is that they kind of go behind it, and then actually the problem gets solved in a completely different way, because it's like this bifurcation doesn't mean, this is like Descartes' error, right? You're saying, I only, I am because I think. So you kind of right there, you've separated out the external world and the internal world. So there is the mind and body. And so it's like you've kind of chopped a human being into two. So it is a combination of a corpse and a ghost, both of which are dead. And the ghost you regard as subjective with all over the thing, and the corpse you regard as the only objective thing, but neither of them have life. Whereas this way of thinking, and in that sense, Bucky is in that tradition of integral thinking. Life is the primary thing, and life runs through it. And patterns that life forms are the external things, and the principles that are driving those patterns are the metaphysical things, and they are intimately related to each other. So it's a very unusual way of solving the problem. So that's why I think I really like the topic of integrity, but it's up to you which ones you want to do. But I think the integrity topic also would go very well with everything else we are doing. Like, for example, I would love to compare it to that and what we are doing with Gibran, because Gibran is very much like that. His thinking is very much like that.
Right. I've been kicking that can down the road a little bit because it is a very deep concept. And so I was like, maybe I need to tackle a little bit. I will say, after tackling universe, integrity should be totally doable.
Yes, no, Marissa, I think you did a fantastic job. I think this meetup worked out really well. Not just you did a job, but I think the way in which other people saw it, other people reacted to it, or what I got from it. And please, folks, let us know how this thing worked for you, because it's really difficult. Okay, so take something like universe and say, okay, how are we going to discuss the universe, this concept of universe, which is a very different concept. And I think what Maritza did was very, very useful, because what she did was she went through everything and she kind of broke it down into fairly well, easily digestible parts. And she highlighted things, kind of key things. So I thought it worked out very well. So what do you think, Maritza? Did it work out okay?
It did. I will say, I feel like I was cheating. I feel like I totally used my time speaking here to solidify my thoughts on it and showcase the things that I thought were important. Hopefully that was helpful for others. No, I read this and it's so dense. And, Bucky has a way with words, but sometimes his way with words kind of get in the way of the words. And so my goal here today was to attempt to present you with the major concepts without losing any of the brilliance that was in there. So I'm hoping that I did with that. I am left with a slight, I feel like I understand him a little bit better, because everyone said little things that were like, oh, puts that into place. And as I was speaking, I have all my notes, but it's just, there's something about when I see all of you, now I have this urgency to make sure that the manner in which I present it doesn't lose you. So doing that helps me kind of gain a little bit better understanding. So it was great for me.
Yeah, and just applying the concept of universe here to this discussion. When you talk about Bucky, his own verbiage of consciously apprehended and communicated material on any topic like universe is so large. Forget about all of humanity, just Bucky producing this, that engaging it, you are only engaging part of it. So folks, I strongly recommend going and reading Bucky yourself, listening to him yourself, because there is nothing like that kind of a mind. It's a very rare mind, completely authentic, independent mind, engaging these topics. And what happens is that when you experience it yourself, depending on what you have and what your strengths are, you will notice something that Maritza couldn't, or I couldn't, or nobody else could, because that's what universe is. And so his talk is part of that universe as he defines it. All right, folks. So everybody seems to like what we did. So I'm delighted. All right. So thank you so much. So I want to tell you what's coming up. Tomorrow, we're doing an overview of the entire farewell discourse of Gospel of John. So Gary's going to give us a bird's eye view of the whole farewell discourse, that is chapters 13 through 17. On Friday, we're going to do divine feminine. I think there are many themes that Brian has, so he will go ahead and present on that. Saturday, we've got the Asian philosophy. Sunday, I don't know whether we have got great plays. This one, today is 14th. 14th, probably we don't have 14th great plays, but at 1 o'clock, we have Rupali presentation, so don't miss that. It's going to be really, really good. And then Monday, we got Poetry Mondays. Do we have a topic or?
We do. We are doing Louise Gluck for the featured poet, and for the collaborative poems, we're actually doing another visual focus, and it's going to be Rafael Arujo. He does geometric art renderings which are stunning. So we're gonna do one of them as our focus and theme.
Wonderful. On Tuesday, we continue with Art of War. And next Wednesday is going to be Neuroscience by Sanjay. So quite a bit. And remember, now all the meetups are at 8 p.m. instead of 9 p.m. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I have not attended John, Gospel of John, whatever it is, but
Yeah.
can I attend it without even having that previous background? Because I heard some lectures,
Yes.
On the, what do you call that, iPod, but if I can just come and.
Yes, okay, to give you more incentive to come, I also have a surprise presentation, but I'm going to disclose the surprise right now. I have the entire Gospel of John summarized in this. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. Okay, so I'm going to have, this is a surprise presentation for Gary. I've just told him that I'm going to make a surprise presentation. So I will be able to explain everything to you, Jyoti, using this thing. Okay.
Great, thank you.
So, all right, folks. So
good night.
Good night, everybody. Bye.
Bye.